If you've ever walked through the front door of your own house and wondered just for a second whether you truly belong there, then this story might feel a little bit like yours. My name is Samantha Walker, and for most of my life, home was a word I whispered more than one I celebrated. Families are supposed to be where we're loved the most. But what if the people who share your blood don't see you at all? What if the rooms you grew up in, the ones filled with laughter and bedtime stories, suddenly become places where you feel invisible? Some say growing up means learning to let go. For me, it meant learning to hold on to hope, even as every familiar comfort seemed to slip away. I remember the moment it all began to change. My father's study, the dusty smell of his favorite old books, and a gentle voice telling me that knowledge would always be my greatest treasure. But life doesn't always honor childhood promises. The world can change in a blink. A parent lost a stranger, stepping in old traditions replaced by new faces and new rules. When my mother remarried, our house didn't just fill with different voices, it filled with silence too. At family dinners, I became an echo. Birthdays passed like any other day. My laughter faded, and I learned how to listen more than speak. My new stepfather, Charles, ran our home like a business, and my mother, Linda, seemed to grow smaller and further away. I watched as my younger half-sister, Emily, grew up in the sunlight I once called my own. It's strange how a house can be filled with people and still feel empty. Still, in every shadow, I clung to small dreams like the hope of one day carving out a space that was truly mine, a space no one could take away. If you've ever found yourself left out of a family photo, if you've ever watched your hopes repackaged and given to someone else, you'll understand what came next. This isn't just a story about losing a room or missing a birthday. It's about what happens when you decide that your story isn't over, no matter how many times others try to rewrite it. My journey wasn't a straight line from heartbreak to triumph. It was a winding path full of setbacks and unexpected kindness, and it began the day I stopped asking for permission to matter. So if you've ever wondered what might happen if you stopped accepting less than you deserve, if you're still searching for your own definition of home, I invite you to walk this road with me. Because sometimes the family we build matters more than the one we're given, and the story we choose to tell ourselves can change everything. Let me take you back to the very first crack in the foundation, to a little girl standing in the hallway, holding a box of memories and a promise to herself, one day I will belong. I used to think that every child has a secret place, a little corner of the world where their dreams feel safe, where love is steady, and nothing truly bad can find them. For me, that place was a small sunlit room at the end of the upstairs hallway. The window overlooked a tangled old oak tree, and my father had painted the walls a hopeful shade of blue. I kept all my treasures there, a jar of pressed wildflowers, a wooden jewelry box he gave me on my 8th birthday, and a stack of storybooks that we read together, night after night. After school, I'd race up the stairs feeling the promise that my little kingdom was waiting. Sometimes I'd lie on the carpet, counting the dust motes spinning through sunbeams, and imagining that everything good would always stay just as it was. But the world is rarely so gentle. When my father died, the house seemed to hold its breath. The blue walls faded, and the air became thick with grown-up voices, careful and distant. My mother, Linda, moved quietly through the days, her face drawn with worry. Nothing was the same, but I still clung to that room, the one place I felt close to him. Change doesn't always come like a storm. Sometimes it arrives quietly, unpacking itself in the middle of the night. My mother remarried just over a year after my father's funeral. Charles Evans was a man with a crisp handshake and a voice that sounded like closing doors. He and his daughter, Emily, moved in the following spring. Suddenly, every room felt smaller, the air tighter, as if our home was wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. I tried to make space for them, tried to welcome this new version of our family, but something was always offbeat, like a song you can't quite remember. One afternoon, I came home to find my belongings packed neatly in cardboard boxes outside my bedroom door. Inside, the space had been repainted a cheerful yellow. Emily's dolls lined the windowsill, my books, my blue curtains, even the quilt my grandmother made, all gone, replaced by something that wasn't mine. When I asked my mother why, her answer was quick and practiced. Emily needs a bigger room now that she's here. You're old enough for the guest room. Just like that, my sanctuary became a memory, and I became a guest in my own home. I wish I could say I handled it with grace, but the truth is, I cried that night. Not loud attention-seeking tears, but the quiet kind that leave a sore, empty ache behind your ribs. It wasn't just about losing 4 walls and a door. It was about losing the last place my father felt close. That night, I clutched the wooden jewelry box and a faded photograph of us sitting in that very room, sunlight on our faces. I remember listening to Emily laugh from the next room, my room, her voice floating on the air like a song that used to belong to me. I kept asking myself if maybe I was being selfish, if maybe I should have tried harder to understand. But when I shared my feelings with my mother, she brushed my worries aside. We all have to adjust, Sam. This is what family means now. Yet in my heart, I knew something fundamental had shifted. Sometimes losing a room isn't just losing space, it's losing proof that you belong. Looking back, I realized that what I learned in that season wasn't about rooms or fairness. It was about listening to the quiet voice inside that tells you when something hurts, and about learning that your feelings are real, even if no one else recognizes them. So many children in blended families carry their heartbreak in silence, believing that adapting means erasing themselves. But pain doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. The first small lesson I learned was this: being asked to give up your place doesn't make you less worthy of one. It took years for that lesson to fully bloom, but it planted a seed. I started noticing how often I faded into the background, how easily my needs were set aside. It would be a long road before I learned to speak up for myself, but the longing to belong never truly left. Instead, it became the question at the heart of my story: what makes a place or a family truly yours? With that question burning quietly inside, I began to notice the shadows that followed me to every dinner table, every family photograph, every unspoken moment of longing. And so the journey deeper into my family's story and my own was just beginning. There's a certain hush that settles over a dinner table when you know you aren't really expected to speak. I used to watch the light flicker off the polished silverware tracing shapes and the condensation on my glass while conversation danced around me, never truly including me. Charles, my stepfather, liked to discuss business headlines and golf tournaments with my mother Linda. Emily, still young, but ever the star, would chatter about her piano recitals, her latest drawing, or a new dress her father bought her. My story science project's a funny moment at school. The books I was reading seemed to fall into a quiet void, landing softly and then fading without a ripple. At first, I tried to join in, carefully saving up things to say, but each attempt was met with distracted nods or gentle redirects. "That's nice, Sam," my mother would say, her eyes already turning back to Charles. Soon I found myself growing quieter, retreating into observation. I became the silent audience to my own family's play. One evening stands out as a perfect snapshot of how far I drifted from the center. It was Emily's 10th birthday, and the dining room was filled with pastel balloons, laughter, and the rich scent of chocolate cake. Family, friends, and neighbors bustled about, snapping photos for the album that would later rest on our living room shelf. When it came time for the big group picture, everyone crowded in, arms linked and smiles wide. I stood at the edge, unsure if I should squeeze in or take the photo myself. Before I could decide, the shutter clicked, and I was left out again. Later, flipping through the album, I found pages filled with images of happiness, my absence almost invisible. I realized that slowly, I'd become a ghost in my own home, present but never quite seen. I remember asking my mother about the missing photo. She simply shrugged. "You weren't standing in front of the camera, sweetheart. Maybe next time." But there never seemed to be a next time. Outside of those celebrations, the small daily moments told their own story. I would leave little notes on the fridge, reminders for groceries, questions about the week ahead, hopes for a Saturday movie night. Most of the time, the notes disappeared, never answered. Emily's wishes, on the other hand, were granted almost before she finished speaking them aloud. She wanted pizza for dinner. We ordered pizza. She wanted to paint her room green. The cans of paint arrived the next day. I learned not to expect too much, and the less I asked, the less disappointment I felt. But there was still a part of me, a stubborn ember, that believed things could change if only I found the right way to ask or the right words to say. I began paying attention to how my friends' families acted. At Madison's house, her parents cheered for her at swim meets and listened to her stories, even the silly ones. At Lucas's, everyone's birthday was a major event no one forgotten. The contrast made my own family's gaps feel sharper, the silence more absolute. But perhaps the most important lesson I learned during those years was that longing for love is not a weakness. It's human. Sometimes I would share my sadness with my grandparents, my father's parents, Henry and Martha, who lived just a few hours away. Their home was small and cluttered, but always open, always warm. When I told them about missing the photo or not being heard at dinner, my grandmother would take my hands in hers and remind me, Family is the place you are loved loudest, not the place you have to fight hardest just to be seen. Those visits kept me going. They showed me that feeling invisible at home didn't mean I was invisible everywhere. There were places and people where I mattered, where my voice had weight and my laughter echoed. They reminded me that belonging doesn't depend on being the favorite or even being noticed by everyone. Sometimes it comes from knowing your worth even when others don't see it. Growing up in that half-lit world taught me something I carry even now. Sometimes you become stronger not despite the shadows, but because you learn to find your own light. I started to look for ways to affirm my own value quietly, but surely. Whether it was excelling at science fairs, helping a classmate through a hard time, or simply finding joy in reading on the back porch, I discovered the importance of nurturing my own sense of self-worth. If your story feels a little like mine, if you've ever watched the world carry on around you while you wait to be noticed, know that you're not alone and you are not invisible. The shadows at the table were real, but they also shaped my resolve. The longing to be seen became fuel for what came next. A dream that stretched beyond the dinner table, beyond even the boundaries of family, into a world I would claim for myself. And so the story of my dreams deferred but not forgotten began to take shape quietly, lighting the way forward. Somewhere between my 12th and 16th birthdays, I became an expert in waiting. I waited for my turn at the dinner table, for my mother's praise, for someone to ask what I wanted to do with my life. But most of all, I waited for the day when the things I hoped for wouldn't have to be set aside for someone else's needs. That day first seemed within reach when my high school guidance counselor handed me a thick, glossy brochure with the word Yale printed in proud blue letters across the top. The possibility of escaping to a place that valued intellect and ambition over family hierarchy made my heart race. I spent months preparing, staying late at the library, joining every club I could, competing in the state science fair. When the acceptance letter finally arrived, I remember standing in the hallway, my hands shaking, the future suddenly wide open. For the first time, it felt like my dreams were mine alone to shape. But dreams, like rooms, can be lost in a single conversation. When I shared my acceptance letter with my mother and Charles, I hoped desperately that pride would light up their faces. Instead, they exchanged glances and reminded me almost gently that finances were tight. Emily, they explained, was about to start at a prestigious arts academy, and her tuition and living expenses would take priority. "You're smart, Sam." My mother said, "I know you'll find scholarships, or maybe consider the local community college for a while. We have to do what's best for the whole family." It wasn't a new refrain. Still, it felt like someone had quietly folded my dreams and placed them at the bottom of a drawer. I tried to argue, brought out spreadsheets, scholarship listings, even stories of students working part-time jobs to afford their education, but the door had already closed. My needs, it seemed, would always be one step behind Emily's. I spent several weeks numb with disappointment, wondering if wanting more was selfish. It would have been easy to accept that my dreams belonged to someone else, that I was destined for a quieter, smaller life. But sometimes when you're left out in the cold, someone unexpected opens their door. For me, that lifeline came in the form of my grandparents. When they heard about Yale, they made the 3-hour drive just to see me. My grandfather, Henry, listened quietly while I described what had happened, my voice barely above a whisper. When I finished, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Sam, your father would have wanted you to chase every last dream you had. Let us help." My grandparents weren't wealthy, but they offered what they could, and with their help and a patchwork of scholarships and campus jobs, I packed my bags and headed to New Haven that fall. I realize now how rare that support can be. I've met so many students whose families withdrew all help, financial and emotional, at the first sign of independence, hoping to teach a lesson that often only led to loneliness and regret. For every story like mine, there are too many of young people carrying debt and disappointment because their dreams didn't fit someone else's plans. What those years taught me was simple, but powerful help can come from the most unexpected places, and pride is never a good reason to turn it down. I learned to ask for what I needed, even if my voice shook or my hands trembled. There is no shame in wanting support, no medal for suffering alone. If you're holding on to a dream that feels out of reach because no one in your life will champion it, keep looking. Sometimes help doesn't come from where you wish it would, but it comes. My grandparents' faith in me became the steady ground beneath every risk I took at Yale, every time I raised my hand in class, every night I worked late to keep my scholarships. That lesson shaped how I see every challenge now as something to be faced, not just endured. Those first weeks on campus were both terrifying and exhilarating, a world away from the silent dinner tables and shrinking rooms of my childhood. I walked under ancient stone archways, found friends who talked about ideas late into the night, and met mentors who encouraged me to speak up. There were setbacks, failed tests, homesickness moments when I wondered if I truly belonged. But I never lost sight of the promise I'd made to myself that no matter what, I wouldn't let my dreams be written by someone else's hand. The experience of almost losing my future taught me the value of every small victory, every door I could open on my own. It made me bolder, more compassionate, and quietly determined to help others find their way. As I stepped deeper into this new chapter, I realized that family can disappoint, but it can also surprise you with kindness. The journey was only beginning, and in the next part, I would meet someone whose guidance would forever change the direction of my life. A mentor who taught me that belonging sometimes starts with believing in yourself. During my first semester at Yale, I felt like a single candle flickering in a cathedral of stars, so many brilliant minds, so many ambitions louder than my own. The city was a patchwork of old stone and fresh hope, and every student seemed to belong effortlessly. For someone used to fading into the background, the sheer noise of belonging was overwhelming. I remember walking through the main quad in early autumn, my books hugged tightly to my chest, trying not to draw attention. In lectures, I rarely raised my hand. In group projects, I volunteered to take notes instead of presenting. I told myself I was just being cautious, but deep down, I was still carrying the shadows of those dinner tables, afraid that my words might vanish before they could make an impact. It was in this uncertain space that I met Professor Benjamin Carter, the first person outside my family to truly see me for who I was, and more importantly, for who I could become. Professor Carter was a legend among students, a tall, thoughtful man with a gentle voice and a knack for asking questions that lingered long after class had ended. He taught introductory data science, a subject I loved, but never dared to claim as my own. After our first midterm, he called me aside to discuss my paper. I expected criticism, but instead he said, "You have a gift for connecting ideas, Sam. Why don't you speak up more?" I fumbled for an answer, embarrassed. He smiled and handed me my marked-up assignment. I know what it's like to feel small in a big room, but hiding your light won't make the world any brighter. That was the first time a mentor offered me not just advice, but an invitation to show up, to risk being seen, to trust that what I had to say mattered. Over the semester, he checked in on me regularly, inviting me to join the lab discussions, encouraging me to present our group's findings, pushing me gently out of my comfort zone. Having a mentor changed more than my grades. It changed the entire direction of my life. I remember one particularly stressful week when I failed a major project and felt like I'd let everyone down. My old instinct was to retreat and fix things quietly, hoping no one would notice. Instead, Professor Carter found me in the library, shoulders hunched over my laptop, and sat beside me. "You're not alone, Sam. No one climbs a mountain without slipping sometimes. Let's figure this out together." He helped me break down the problem, showing me that setbacks are not proof you don't belong. They're just part of learning something real. His faith gave me permission to take bigger risks, to join the university's data research team, to apply for summer internships, and even to teach an introductory workshop for high school students. The more I stepped up, the more I realized that courage grows with use, and confidence is something you build, not something you wait for. I saw how different life could be when someone championed your growth. Unlike home, where every resource seemed to be measured and rationed, Professor Carter's encouragement was abundant, offered without strings. He never compared me to other students, never asked me to shrink for someone else's sake. Instead, he modeled a generosity of spirit that changed how I treated myself and others. I noticed it too in my new circle of friends at Yale. We celebrated each other's wins, stayed up late, troubleshooting code, swapped tips for time management and self-care. For the first time, I understood what it meant to belong to a community where support was shared freely, not hoarded or weaponized. It made me wonder why so many families, including my own, struggle to give that same kind of love. The truth is, many parents believe that adversity is the best teacher, when in reality, it's empathy that helps us grow strong and resilient. The small lesson I carried forward was this: when someone invests in your dreams, you learn to invest in yourself. And when you do, the world starts to expand. Professor Carter's mentorship wasn't just a guiding hand up the academic mountain, it was a signal that I deserved to be at the summit too. I began to see each challenge as an opportunity, each failure as a foothold rather than a fall. Looking back, I'm grateful for the setbacks as much as the triumphs, because they taught me to reach out to accept help and to offer it in return. That spirit of mentorship and the confidence it sparked set the stage for what came next, building a life of my own, making a home defined not by the past but by new beginnings. As the end of my college years approached, I found myself daring to dream bigger, to imagine a place, maybe even a home, where I could finally belong. And so, with hope gathering strength, I set out to build something entirely my own. Graduation day at Yale was more than a ceremony for me. It was a quiet victory, a gentle affirmation that the story I'd been telling myself could finally change. My grandparents sat in the front row, waving and beaming, while my mother sent a brief congratulatory text and Emily posted a photo of her latest art exhibit. As I crossed the stage, I felt the weight of every dinner table, every closed door, every whispered hope that things could be different. The diploma in my hand was more than paper. It was proof that I could build a life from the fragments others left behind. When I hugged my grandfather outside the auditorium, he pressed a key into my hand. "A little something to get you started, Sam," he said softly. It was the key to his old pickup truck, a battered but reliable companion for the next chapter. With a heart full of gratitude, I packed my few belongings and drove toward Boston, where a job at a growing tech company waited for me. It was the first step in making a home of my own. My first apartment wasn't much by most standards, a tiny studio in a creaky building overlooking a narrow, bustling street. The floors sloped, the pipes rattled, and in winter, the windows sometimes iced over from the inside. Still, I loved every inch of it. I furnished it with mismatched thrift store finds, strung fairy lights across the ceiling, and set up a desk by the window for my books and work. Every corner held a small freedom, the ability to cook what I wanted, to play music late, to invite friends over for board games and pizza. Sometimes I would sit on the window ledge with a mug of tea and watch the city lights flicker, amazed by the simple fact that no one could ask me to leave or claim my space as their own. I made a point of inviting friends in need of a listening ear, remembering what it felt like to be the outsider. In those small acts of hospitality, I found pieces of the home I'd always longed for, one where everyone belonged, even if only for a night. Still, as I settled into adulthood, I noticed a pattern among the people around me. Many of my colleagues and friends were fiercely independent, successful, and determined to make it on their own. Yet beneath their confidence, I often sensed a quiet loneliness, the kind that lingers even in a crowded city. We compared stories, childhood bedrooms, lost in divorce, parents who moved on without looking back, siblings who drifted away. We all carried a private ache, a longing for roots deeper than a lease or a paycheck. I began to realize that home was never just about real estate or decor. It was about connection, about building a life where you felt safe enough to be seen and strong enough to let others in. I started hosting found family dinners every other Sunday, inviting friends, colleagues, and sometimes complete strangers. Those gatherings became the heartbeat of my new life, a reminder that you can build belonging one meal and one story at a time. The lesson of those early years was simple but transformative. Home is not a place you inherit, but one you create brick by brick, kindness by kindness. You don't have to accept the script handed to you or settle for the spaces left behind by others. The beauty of adulthood is that you get to decide what home means and who gets to share it with you. If your life feels rootless, or if you're starting over in a new city or stage, know that home can be a work in progress as long as you fill it with love and courage. With every dinner shared, every friend welcomed, and every challenge overcome, I found myself growing stronger, more grounded, and more open to the next possibilities. What I didn't know then was that even the home I carefully built for myself could still be shaken by old family ties. The next chapter began the day I planned a celebration, my first real housewarming party, only to find that the echoes of the past were not so easily left behind. When I bought my first little house near the lake outside Boston, I felt a pride that was quiet but fierce. Something earned, not given. It was an old cottage with creaky floors and stubborn windows. But to me, it was a palace. After years of apartments and uncertainty, this space was wholly, finally mine. I spent months saving up, painting the walls a calm shade of blue, and planting wildflowers by the porch just like my father once did. By the end of spring, I decided it was time to share this joy with the people who had become my chosen family. I dreamed of laughter echoing off the walls, long tables filled with home-cooked food, and friends wandering the garden as twilight settled over the lake. With a deep breath, I called my mother and invited her, hoping maybe, just maybe, old wounds could be softened by new beginnings. She sounded pleased, almost excited, and offered to help organize the housewarming party. It felt like a small step toward healing, a sign that perhaps my family could finally celebrate something I'd built on my own. The weeks leading up to the party were a blur of planning and anticipation. I sent invitations to friends, colleagues, and neighbors. My mother took charge of the details with a determination that surprised me, calling the caterer, picking out decorations, arranging music. I transferred her the savings I'd set aside, trusting her to make everything special. Then 3 days before the party, I received a group message from Emily. So excited for my baby shower this weekend? At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as photos started arriving, balloons in pink and blue banners reading "Welcome Baby Evans," the truth settled over me like a cold shadow. My mother had quietly repurposed my housewarming into a celebration for Emily's pregnancy, inviting her friends, her husband's family, and turning my home into a stage for a life I wasn't even part of. My name had been added as an afterthought on the invitation tucked beneath Emily's, as if I were a co-host rather than the reason for the gathering. The kitchen was stocked with Emily's favorite foods, and all the decorations matched the nursery she'd been designing for months. My dream of being seen even just for one night faded once again into the background. I tried to explain my hurt to my mother over the phone, my voice trembling with disappointment. She replied gently but firmly, "Sam, this is such a big moment for your sister. You've had so many successes lately. Emily deserves this one. It's all family, isn't it? Can't you share your happiness?" The words stung. I realized painfully that my willingness to make space for others had somehow become an expectation, that my achievements made it easier for my family to overlook my needs. This wasn't the first time either. Growing up, I'd watched my milestones repackaged, my quiet celebrations overshadowed by someone else's louder joys. I saw it in the way Emily's report cards became family events, while my scholarships merited a polite nod. I saw it in the holidays when my requests were sidelined by her traditions. I'd always tried to be generous, believing that love meant making room for everyone. But generosity, I was learning, has its limits, especially when it isn't reciprocated. The lesson I took from that day was a difficult one. Sharing is beautiful, but self-erasure is not. Sometimes, in our eagerness to keep peace or maintain harmony, we let our boundaries dissolve. We convince ourselves that it's all family or it's just one day. But the pattern of being sidelined, if unchecked, can stretch across a lifetime. That weekend, as guests arrived for the baby shower, I welcomed them with a polite smile, but I didn't let myself disappear. I made a quiet promise that the next celebration I hosted would be one where I could stand at the center of my own life. If you're listening and this feels familiar, know that you're not wrong for wanting to be seen or for feeling the ache of invisibility. There's a difference between being kind and being overlooked. As the laughter faded and the last car left my driveway, I realized that old family patterns are stubborn, but they can be changed. And sometimes all it takes is the courage to claim your story and say gently but firmly, "This is mine." That moment was the beginning of a bigger confrontation, one where I would finally find my voice and speak it, no matter who was listening. There comes a point in every life when silence becomes heavier than any words you might dare to speak. That moment arrived for me on the day of Emily's baby shower. What was supposed to be my housewarming, my long-awaited celebration, quietly turned into another chapter of standing on the sidelines. The rooms of my new house echoed with the voices of guests I barely knew, laughter swirling around Emily as she unwrapped presents and posed for photos. I moved through the room, straightening plates and offering drinks, trying to ignore the hollow ache in my chest. But as the party wore on, I felt a quiet resolve building inside me, a stubborn refusal to let another milestone be rewritten by someone else. When my mother caught my eye across the kitchen, her smile faltered for a second, as if she could sense the shift. That was the moment I decided no more. If no one else was going to say it, I would. After the gifts had been opened and the last round of applause faded, I gently tapped a glass with a fork, asking for everyone's attention. The chatter died away, and for a moment the only sound was the distant call of a mourning dove by the lake. My hands shook a little as I spoke, but my voice was steady. "Thank you all for coming today," I began. "I want to say something not just about this house, but about what it means to finally build something of your own." I paused, feeling 100 eyes on me. For many years, I watched from the edge as others celebrated their milestones, believing if I gave enough, if I stayed quiet enough, I would eventually be seen. But today I realized that kindness does not mean erasing yourself, and love does not require silence. I glanced at my mother, whose expression had turned from surprise to worry, and at Emily, who suddenly looked uncertain. I spoke plainly about the party, about the pattern of being overlooked, about how it hurts to be invisible even in your own home. I didn't raise my voice or point fingers. I simply told the truth quietly and completely. In the moments that followed, the room was heavy with silence, the kind that only comes when something real is finally spoken aloud. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others sympathetic. My mother rose to speak, her voice trembling, as she insisted she'd only wanted to make everyone happy. Emily protested, reminding everyone that she was about to become a mother herself and deserved a little extra attention. I listened, but this time I didn't shrink or apologize. I thanked them for sharing the day and made it clear that from now on I would host my own celebrations on my own terms. That simple act, drawing a boundary, not with anger but with clarity, changed the energy in the room. A few friends came over, quietly squeezing my hand in support. Others helped tidy up their gestures, gentle, wordless acknowledgments that what I'd said needed to be heard. It was uncomfortable, even a little messy, but for the first time in years, I felt honest and free. The lesson from that day stays with me. Still, speaking up is never about winning an argument or changing someone's mind. It's about honoring your experience, your history, and your heart. For a long time, I thought love meant compromise, even if that meant erasing myself. But true belonging, I've learned, is only possible when you bring your full self to the table, stories, scars, and all. If you've ever hesitated to speak your truth, afraid it might shatter the peace, remember that peace built on silence is only ever temporary. When we give voice to our needs, we make it possible for others to know and respect them too. The courage it takes to be seen is also the courage it takes to build something lasting. After the guests left and the sun set behind the lake, I stood in the quiet of my home, heart pounding, but lighter than it had been in years. That night, I finally allowed myself to dream of a future shaped by my own voice, not by the shadows of the past. And that future began sooner than I imagined, with a family reckoning that would upend everything I thought I knew about loyalty, inheritance, and the meaning of home. In the weeks after the confrontation at my house, an uneasy calm settled over my family. There were fewer calls, shorter texts, and a distance that felt almost like relief. But just as I began to find peace in my quiet routines, watering the wildflowers, walking by the lake, reading late into the night, another ripple from the past arrived in the form of a letter from my grandparents' lawyer. I had always known that Henry and Martha, my father's parents, were steady supporters in my life, quietly giving what they could while honoring my independence. They had hinted at their wishes for me, but I never expected anything formal. The letter was both simple and profound. My grandparents had updated their will, naming me the sole inheritor of their home savings and cherished heirlooms. The news shook me, not for the material value, but for what it meant. For the first time, someone in my family had chosen in writing and in spirit to say, "You matter most." The announcement didn't stay private for long. Word spread quickly, as these things do in families, and before I knew it, my mother was calling with a brittle voice and questions masked as concern. Emily sent a flurry of texts oscillating between hurt and outrage, wondering why she wasn't included. It was as if my grandparents' decision built an invisible wall, one that had existed in spirit for years, but was now unmissable, etched into legal documents and family stories alike. The conversations were uncomfortable, sometimes even cruel. My mother insisted she never meant to hurt me, that she always believed in fairness. But when I asked her to recall specific moments, birthdays, forgotten achievements, ignored the party that became someone else's, she had no answer. In truth, the will had only clarified what years of small exclusions had already proven family is not just about blood, but about the choices we make to honor and see one another. I thought of the many stories I'd heard from friends and colleagues of inheritance disputes, tearing families apart, of siblings going to court over heirlooms, and old houses of long-held resentments bursting into the open at the worst possible moments. In some ways, my story was no different. The difference was that the inheritance my grandparents offered me wasn't just a house or a savings account. It was their faith built over decades of small kindnesses and steadfast support. Their home in Vermont was filled with memories: summer picnics, Christmas mornings, afternoons spent listening to stories by the fire. I realized then that what I'd inherited was not just property, but the courage to finally draw my own boundaries. My grandparents chose me not to spite my mother or Emily, but to acknowledge the bond we had nurtured, one built not on obligation, but on understanding and love. For the first time, I understood that true family sometimes means choosing, not just being chosen. The lesson was subtle but transformative. You do not have to keep rebuilding bridges to people who are content to watch you swim. Family, I've learned, is not a prize you win by sacrificing your happiness, but a relationship you build by showing up, telling the truth, and honoring both your needs and theirs. The news of the will changed how I saw my own worth. It gave me permission to stop chasing the approval of those who could not or would not give it. If you find yourself waiting for a parent's recognition or a sibling's gratitude, ask yourself what you might build instead, and who will truly celebrate with you when you succeed. As I made plans to visit my grandparents and thank them in person, I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. I no longer needed everyone to understand my journey, only to walk it with those who chose me as I am. What I didn't realize was that this newfound clarity would be tested in ways I never expected, as my family's fragile peace gave way to a reckoning that would force us all to reconsider what it means to forgive, to heal, and to finally truly come home. Healing, I've learned, is rarely a straight path. It's not just about letting go of old pain, but about learning to see yourself outside of that pain, to make peace with the chapters you couldn't rewrite, and to honor the growth that happened anyway. After the inheritance news settled and the dust of family arguments began to clear, I found myself alone in my little lake house, facing a kind of quiet I hadn't known since childhood. I thought I would feel triumphant, but instead, there was an ache, an emptiness, where the longing for approval used to be. Grief, I realized, doesn't vanish just because the story turns in your favor. For a while, I walked through the rooms of my home, touching the windowsills and the painted walls, wondering if I could finally build a life without the need to prove anything to anyone. The air was different. For the first time, it was just mine. In that new quiet, I began to search for something deeper than pride or even happiness. I wanted peace. I started small therapy sessions every other week, journaling before bed, morning walks by the lake, and phone calls with my grandparents, just to say thank you. Sometimes I'd visit them in Vermont and let Martha fuss over me in the kitchen, her hugs warm and lingering. Henry would sit with me on the porch sharing old family stories, and never once making me feel less than whole. Their unconditional love was a balm proof that the best kind of family is chosen every single day. I also reached out quietly to friends and colleagues who'd been through similar family fractures. We shared stories of birthdays missed, of parents who remarried and left us in the margins of trying so hard to earn what should have been freely given. In those honest conversations, I found relief and a sense of belonging. I realized that while pain can isolate, healing can unite. One summer, inspired by my grandparents' example, I started a small scholarship fund in my father's name. I wanted to give back to kids who, like me, had to forge their own paths through college without the support they needed at home. At the first award ceremony, a shy high school senior approached me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "You make me believe I can do it too." Her words reminded me that every time we speak our truth, we make room for others to do the same. I found that giving, when done from a place of wholeness, not obligation, felt like planting seeds in ground I'd finally cleared for myself. It was healing work too, slowly mending the belief that my value depended on someone else's recognition. Instead, it became about honoring my journey and building new legacies of care. The lesson that finally settled in my heart was this: healing does not require perfect closure or even forgiveness in the way we imagine it. Sometimes it just means living well despite what's missing, showing up for yourself and for others with softness and hope. As my life began to fill with small joys, a new garden laughter, with friends, quiet nights of music and tea, I stopped waiting for the family I'd always wanted to suddenly appear. Instead, I celebrated the family I had: my grandparents, my friends, the people I'd gathered and chosen. My relationship with my mother and Emily became cordial if distant, and for the first time that felt enough. The work of healing made room for gratitude, for possibility for the next chapter. As autumn painted the trees gold around the lake house, I realized my journey had come full circle, not back to the start, but forward into a life finally defined by love freely given and received. And so, as I stood at my front door one evening watching the sunset over the water, I felt ready for whatever future I might choose to build on my own terms and in my own light. On a crisp November evening, I found myself setting the table in my little lake house for a gathering that looked nothing like the family holidays of my childhood. There were no obligatory seats or silent expectations, no tense undercurrents or faded hopes. Instead, my grandparents were there, smiling and gentle, along with friends from all different corners of my life, colleagues who had become confidants, neighbors who brought homemade bread, and even the first recipient of my scholarship now, a freshman at college and glowing with possibility. We ate potluck style, everyone bringing something uniquely, their own laughter rising easily, stories weaving through candlelight. It struck me as I watched this chosen family fill my home with warmth that belonging is not a birthright, but an act of courage, a willingness to build connection, even after disappointment, to trust that love can be found and made again and again. As the evening settled into gentle conversation, I looked around and realized how much my definition of family had changed. Once I thought it meant being included by default, having a place because of blood or tradition. Now I knew it was about being seen and valued for exactly who you are and choosing every day to surround yourself with those who lift you higher. My journey had taught me that home is not where you never get hurt, but where healing is welcome, where your voice is heard, and where celebrations, big or small, are shared with honesty. My friends and I talked openly about the ways we'd all been let down and the ways we were learning to show up differently for ourselves and each other. The freedom to create a family from scratch became a gift. I cherished a reminder that we are never truly alone in our longing to belong. Before the night ended, my grandfather made a quiet toast, his eyes shining with pride. To Sam, he said, "Who taught us all that family is built, not found?" May we always have the courage to love bravely and the wisdom to let go of what no longer serves us. His words lingered in the air, wrapping around the table like a blessing. I thought of all the milestones both missed and reclaimed, the years of learning to speak my truth, the slow, patient work of healing. It wasn't a perfect journey. There were scars and detours, grief that sometimes still caught me by surprise. But the lesson I hoped everyone would carry from my story was this: you are worthy of celebration just as you are. You have the right to seek out and shape the relationships that make you feel whole. And even if your beginnings were tangled or lonely, your future can be crafted with hope, intention, and love. Now, as the seasons change and I look forward to the next chapters, I hold onto the quiet joy of that night, the fullness of a home built with kindness and intention, the peace that comes from knowing I have chosen and been chosen in return. My story is just one among many, but if you've listened this far, I hope you feel the same possibility stirring in your own life. The path to belonging is rarely simple, but it is always worth walking. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Wherever you are and whoever you choose as your family, may your days be filled with light, your table always open, and your heart gently at home. If my story has resonated with you, I invite you to take a moment and reflect. Who are the people in your life that truly see and celebrate you? Maybe it's time to reach out and thank them, or even to start building the community you've always wanted. One conversation, one shared meal, one small act of kindness at a time. I'd love to hear your story too. Have you ever had to redefine what family means for you? What helped you find your own sense of belonging? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experience could be the encouragement someone else needs. If this video has touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, or share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder that they are not alone. Together, we can create a space where everyone is welcome, everyone is heard, and every story matters. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for choosing to walk this path with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep building the home that feels right in your heart.